Hello, I'm Leonardo Puglisi. It's Sunday, the 16th of October. You're watching 6 News, our top stories this hour. A massive clean-up effort begins for some, others still under evacuation warnings and on high alert after rain lashes much of the eastern states and causes flash flooding in Victoria and Tasmania. Also exclusive, Firefighters Union Secretary Peter Marshall speaks to 6 News about a new pre-election blitz, accusing the Andrews government of trashing firefighter cancer laws and the Victorian Premier of being misleading. The report finds that Australia's social security system is keeping students in poverty, with the federal government called upon to change age of independence rules, and the death toll from an explosion in a coal mine rises overnight in northern Turkey, bringing the rescue operation to an end as investigations begin to find out what happened. Good evening. As we go to where tonight, residents across much of Victoria and Tasmania are still on high alert and unable to return to their homes, with new evacuation warnings issued in some areas. Authorities say the water may not recede for a week, and Echuca and Mulwamma in Victoria could be affected by even more flash flooding to come. There's also warnings that another weather system is highly likely to affect Australia's east coast in the coming days, with storms and heavy rain in Melbourne, Sydney, Hobart and Canberra all forecasted. Austin Pollock begins our special coverage.
A massive clean-up effort just beginning for some, others gravely concerned as Victorian authorities warn we could see the largest ever evacuation order in the state's history. This flooding event turning deadly, with a 71-year-old man found dead in his backyard at 9:30 a.m. yesterday.
I just make the point, we'll stand with that family and all families affected by this. But it just brings home for all of us that this is serious, this is potentially very, very dangerous.
So far, just under 500 properties have been inundated with floodwater, over 45 millimetres of rain falling in Melbourne and over 75 millimetres in Shepparton over the past days. Victorian Police Assistant Commissioner David Clayton has said 200 rescues have already been performed at homes, 150 to people driving through floodwaters, and 10 to capsized boats, renewing the calls that if it's flooded, forget it.
The consequences of not heeding the warning have been seen in some areas where we've responded to those homes that were asked to evacuate and we've had to rescue people.
People from all across Australia are mesmerised how high flood levels have gotten in such a short period of time.
And come to a disaster. It's absolutely heartbreaking for the families out here today. We do flood in Sydney, but nothing like this. This is quite intense. My heart goes out.
And it's not over yet, with communities such as Shepparton, Charlton and Echuca on extremely high alert. Evacuation orders right now in place. Last night, some told it was too late to leave. The Premier taking to Twitter saying that while the skies are blue, there is a massive amount of water in the catchments that'll be moving down the river in the coming days. The state government has opened 13 centres for people left stranded after the floods have ripped through the state, and they're working with the federal government to open the Mickleham quarantine facility to help flood-affected residents. It comes as the clean-up effort begins in Maribyrnong as residents start to return and survey the damage, with thankfully Vic Emergency downgrading the alert for that area, with the ongoing threat of flooding now reduced.
If your property has seen flood waters inside, you need to be checking your gas and electrical services by a professional. We're advising people to make sure you're wearing strong boots and gloves. Don't go back there in basic footwear and other clothing. Be prepared for the conditions that you might find at your property.
It comes as weather experts warn another system is likely to affect Australia's east coast over the next week, raining on already drenched grounds.
What we will see now over the next few days is fairly stable weather, but once we move into Wednesday, it looks as though we will see another low pressure system start to impact on the east coast of Australia, but more New South Wales and into Victoria.
Controlled releases have already begun at Wivenhoe Dam northwest of Brisbane as La Nina begins to wreak havoc. Leo, as of right now, there are evacuation orders in place for Echuca and Charlton, which are north of Melbourne. It is too late to leave for Shepparton, Orovale, Murchison, Maroonpuna, Lake Eppalock, Kale West and more. And of course, it's always best to check the Emergency Victoria website that That course website is on your screen, emergency.vic.gov.au. Now, the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese spoke alongside Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews at a press conference where they announced that 250 beds at the former quarantine facility in Mickleham will open to help those whose homes have been inundated with floodwater over the past few days, with residents also set to be provided with food and supporting services. And we've also learnt the identity of the man who was tragically found dead in floodwaters at his home yesterday at Rochester. His name was Kevin Wills and he was 71. So certainly a ever-developing situation here in Victoria tonight, Leo, and a very nerve-wracking few hours and days ahead for Victorians.
Austin, thank you, and we will get to our senior reporter Darby Travers on the ground in Maribyrnong in Victoria for tomorrow's national weather forecast a little later, but changing pace now, and the Albanese government has announced an infrastructure boost ahead of this month's federal budget. It includes $300 million for a Western Sydney roads package, $125 million in funding to assist building an electric bus network for Perth, $540 million for upgrades to important road corridors in Tasmania, and $2.2 billion for Victoria's suburban rail link, despite a threat from the state opposition to scrap the project if elected in the state next month. The Prime Minister says it's about, quote, making journeys quicker but also making sure people can get home to their families safely. It also comes as Social Services Minister Amanda Rishworth again confirms the government is not considering raising the job seeker payment in the budget, saying, we understand Australians are doing it tough, but, quote, any measures need to be considered in the full budget context. United Firefighters Union Secretary Peter Marshall has spoken to 6 News about a new pre-election campaign blitz which has accused the Andrews government of trashing firefighter cancer laws and the Victorian Premier himself of being misleading. Marshall is also looking for a pay rise for firefighters, but is now facing questions about whether a coalition government would be any better for them. Broadling and Holmes has the exclusive details.
At the Victorian election, Labor is already facing challenges from the Coalition, the Greens and Independents. And now the United Firefighters Union will campaign in a number of key seats.
What we are doing at the moment is our union has actually developed a scorecard, if you like, and it's been sent to all candidates of political persuasion, including independents, with the issues that we are very important to firefighters. At the end of the day, we're asking for a written response. And on that basis, we won't be engaging in ideological partisan support of a political party.
The union says that the Andrews government has trashed firefighter cancer laws, with a change seeing references to the word firefighter replaced with the word person. According to the Herald Sun, the original law meant a firefighter diagnosed with cancer did not have to prove it was caused by their career to make a claim.
Sure, they've got breathing apparatus on, they've got the fire suits on, but the fire suit construction is such that it is a compromise between the protection of radiated heat as well as being engulfed in flame, but also it actually must release metabolic heat buildup. So, in other words, the uniform breathes. No other worker has the unavoidable risk of going into a burning building knowingly exposed to material that's going to cause cancer.
Peter Marshall is the union secretary in Victoria. The union says the laws have been trashed.
Ministers Jacqueline Symes and Ingrid Stitt and Bronwyn Halfpenny MP changed the law to add people who don't even fight fires.
Why we say he misleads the public is he says, look, when workers work side by side experiencing the same exposure, they should have the same protection. Mechanics do not go into burning buildings. They do not fight fires. It is wrong for him to mislead the public that way.
Have they said anything about why they've decided to, go ahead with this even when you're, lobbying against it? Have they explained those reasons to you? Do you understand those reasons?
One of the most offensive thing was that no one owned the legislation. No one would say it was my bill. In fact, they didn't even put it on the list of bills to be debated. They put it in an omnibus bill, whereas it was hidden. It was only because of the good work of my office that they actually became aware. They said, well, look, this is a policy commitment to another group of employees. What it really is a dirty factional deal. And I can say that from knowledge of being in work at the internal workings of the ALP. So despite there being no evidence, despite there being no basis, despite it being a change that will compromise the long and short-term the medium to long-term viability of the scheme, they went ahead and put it in place.
Marshall also wants a pay rise, but has faced questions about whether it would be achieved under a coalition government if they're elected.
That's a really interesting question, because our experience with coalition governments, in particular most unions, if not all, have been not a very nice one. What we'll be doing is looking for people who are going to represent the interests of firefighters. And may I say, our campaign is this: firefighter safety equals public safety.
The state government is standing by the firefighter cancel laws, with 41 days until Victoria decides. Lincoln Holmes, 6 News.
A doctor who was last year being investigated over claims he handed out fake COVID-19 vaccine exemptions has now been dumped as a candidate for the Freedom Party of Victoria. Dr. Mark Hobart was announced as a candidate for the Northern Metropolitan region, but has since been replaced by Damien Richardson, who was initially running for the Australian Federation Party. Hobart, who ran for the Great Australian Party at the federal election in the seat of Maribyrnong, said on Twitter that he was, quote, told I was no longer needed as they had a preferred candidate in Damien Richardson. I'm a team player. And best of luck to Damien. Came just hours after the Freedom Party wrapped up their first ever conference with singing, performed in part by Deputy Leader and former Queensland MP Aidan McLindon.
We've got to play our part, not be left fighting for the crumbs. And there's a time when shoots the stars and bargain stops.
The party has also announced their own shadow ministry, a term usually reserved for members of the opposition who have representation in Parliament. They are contesting seats in both the upper and lower houses, including Dan Andrews' seat of Mulgrave. Reporters found that Australia's social security system is keeping students in poverty, with the federal government now called upon to change age of independence rules. Earlier I spoke to Georgie Beattie, president of the National Union of Students, to discuss more.
This is a solvable problem, right? There are pretty specific things we think the government can do that will drastically improve this problem. One is lowering the age of independence from 22 to 18. It's pretty reasonable. They committed to doing it under the last government. It was an NUS win that we managed to reduce it from 25 to 22. Now we need to take it down to 18. We need to lift social security payments to $88 a day, which is above the poverty line. We need to adjust Centrelink payments twice a year with cost of living, as happens with the pension and all of these other, social security payments, and update rent assistance.
And I know a lot of what the actions you want taken are federal, and they are specific to federal. Is there anything state or territory governments could do to even help with the current situation right now regarding student poverty? Is there any actions they could take, even small or minor?
Great question. I think doing a lot of stuff around rent assistance and actually improving rental conditions, rental caps in states would be massive at the moment. I know myself, I was forced to move out of the property that I was living in, that I was renting, and had to move, and my rent went up like $150. It was, as someone on minimum wage, really hurt. So taking some action around that would be really easy for state governments, and would make a massive difference for students in this area. But yeah, a lot of the things we want are federal and around the welfare system, which is harder for the state governments to, push for. We've just had 2 years of COVID. We're in a cost of living crisis, and being a student is more expensive than it's ever been in Australia. One, because we're racking up these massive debts as we're studying. And two, because cost of living is so high, it's really hard for students that are on placement, for example, like nursing students. We have so many stories of students that go into debt while they're on placement because they aren't able to, they're effectively working full-time for free and then expected to work on top of that, and then often, expected to do regional placements where they have to relocate and can't work their job. That's created a systematic failure where right now students are really, really hurting, and they're fighting to survive. And these are really simple solutions, like changing the age of independence, that would completely solve that problem.
Overseas now, the death toll from an explosion in a coal mine has risen overnight in northern Turkey, bringing the rescue operation to an end. According to the BBC, 110 people were in the mine at the time of the explosion, with around half over 300 metres deep. Turkey's president has vowed to investigate and wants this to be the country's last mining disaster, with their worst coming back in 2014 when 301 people died in western Turkey. French authorities have announced that the country will train up to 2,000 Ukrainian soldiers on its territory. The country's armed forces minister says they will look at, quote, specific needs outlined by the Ukrainians, such as logistics, with France also providing Ukraine with air defence systems. It comes as Russia's defence ministry said 2 attackers opened fire at a military firing range near Ukraine, resulting in the deaths of 11 people, along with 15 others who were injured in an incident they've now called a terrorist attack. Well, changing pace now, and on Thursday night on Spin Check Live, we're meant to bring you a bit of a Q&A on 6 News' Australian government and law coverage with our new podcast between Parks Place and, of course, Commonwealth Knowledge with Stuart Jeffrey. We were supposed to speak to him. Unfortunately, that was a little rushed, so we're going to have another crack at it here tonight. I spoke to Stuart Jeffrey earlier about the new podcast, what we can expect on it, and also some of your questions about what you want to see from us and what you already have to question about what we've already been covering. So take a look.
Some of these issues are quite complicated. How I write them is I try and write them for a variety of different people, different levels of understanding. So some of them will be too complex for some people, but that's unfortunately a result of what we have to deal with in terms of the issues at hand. I think people should definitely care about them, and I reckon some issues are The Voice, Scott Morrison's Secret Ministries, the Republic debate. All these things are legal issues that people kind of skirt around, and we try and address those head on in the series to really try and work out what exactly those mean. And I think that's the important part. And according to the figures we have, there definitely is an audience for it. Well, there definitely has tried to be a hard separation of powers when it comes to Parliament and the executive versus the courts. But even with that separation of powers, the issue is still going to become interrelated. Certainly in some aspects of law, less so. The constitutional law generally is quite related. For example, the 5th episode of the series looked at a case, Silver Hill, which was basically declared an election invalid because the candidate who won was a dual citizen, and that affected the outcome of the 1998 Queensland election. The affected person was Heather Hill, the leader of One Nation, which won 11 seats that election, and after the election they collapsed. And that case is part of the reason why, because they lost their leader. So there definitely is that connection in constitutional law.
What do the capital letters after a judge's name actually mean? Because even I found myself confused at this.
So it's a pretty common practice in terms of legal writing. It's definitely the required way of doing it for lawyers and legal scholars, at least in Australia. So the little J will mean like justice. It's just an abbreviation, basically. J for justice, J for justices, plural. That seems weird, but then you realise, hang on, PP means pages, P means page, so it's the same sort of practice there.
Said last time we spoke, we were working towards getting guests, but we knew the topic, which of course was the Greens and marijuana. Do we have those guests now?
We do. We've got David Shoebridge, a Green Senator and their Justice spokesperson, and then we'll also be joined by Professor Graham Orr from the TC Burns School of Law.
Stuart Jeffrey there, and of course you can find Between Parks Place and Capitol Hill on Apple, on Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, and on our website, 6newsau.com. Now, taking a look at what's making news on 6newsau.com right now, and a new edition of Commonwealth Knowledge is out with Australia, set to make history with the appointment of a Federal Court Australia judge, that being Jane Jaggett to the High Court of Australia. She will be the 56th High Court judge, replacing Patrick Keane. Also, the Liberal Party at 78, governing in their own right in one state, 2 upcoming elections, and a reasonably new leader. Does the party need to move to the centre, or should they go to the right, and should they wait for the Victorian election before actually making a decision? And a sustainable Australia MP says the minority government is the best outcome of the Victorian election. Clifford Hayes, speaking to 6 News about what he's done in Parliament since 2018, his party's immigration policy and group voting tickets. So check that out right now. And I was Ivan Amelli with look what's coming up later tonight on WAMN News.
Thank you, Leo. Tonight on WAMN News, petrol vouchers to fight the rising cost of living. Calls for Premier Mark McGowan to consider additional help for struggling families. An exclusive interview coming up.
Concerns over the strength of WA's emergency laws raised as the state government plans to keep G2G data for 25 years.
Nurses and midwives take mass industrial action in pursuit of a 10% pay rise.
Madeline Lombardi joins the news team from next week, and later Dr. Andrew Miller's comment. Join us tonight on the WAMN News Facebook page and YouTube channel.
Alright, thanks both Arvin and Melly there. Now returning to our special coverage of the flood crisis. Senior reporter Darby Travers is on the ground in Maribyrnong in Melbourne with the latest developments and a look at tomorrow's national weather forecast.
Leo, good evening to you. Well, the cleanup here along the Maribyrnong River is well and truly underway after that major weather front you just mentioned passed right throughout Victoria over the weekend. Now, the most falls were seen in regional parts of the state, along with the widespread flooding causing those emergency evacuation warnings in Shepparton, Charlton and Echuca. Now, the SES is still responding to thousands of call-outs for help, but despite the system moving out to our east, we are being warned there could be more damaging weather events in coming months. But right now, let's check in with tomorrow's weather forecast right across the country. And Brisbane can expect a shower or two, top of 25. Possible late showers in Sydney, 20 degrees there. Similar conditions in the nation's capital. A mostly sunny day on the way for Melbourne, top of 18. Possible late showers in Hobart. A nice warm one for Adelaide, getting to 25. Partly cloudy in Perth, a top of 22. And Darwin warming up to 35 degrees. Well, the river has gone down here in Maribyrnong, but no doubt we send all of our love and thoughts up to the residents of the Echuca area.
Darby Travers there. Before we go tonight, recapping the top story here on 6 News this hour, and as we go to air right now, residents across much of Victoria and Tasmania are still on high alert and unable to return to their homes. Authorities saying that the water may not recede for a week, and Echuca and Moama in Victoria could be affected by even more flash flooding to come. And just before we go tonight, we do have Spin Check airing this week. We don't have Spin Check live. We've got a Spin Check special with political editor Roman McKinnon looking at how Anthony Albanese became Prime Minister and how the media cover that. So we're speaking to a lot of people. We're looking at that. It's a 5-month special report in the making. One of those people we're speaking to is 7 political editor Mark Riley. So some great guests we've got coming up. You definitely do not want to miss it. It's going to be a fantastic report. And of course, that is by Roman McKinnon. So you can watch it 8 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time this coming Thursday on our YouTube channel and our website, SIXNewsAU.com. And of course, you can catch up anytime after that. So do not miss that. And that is 6 News for this Sunday evening. You can stay up to date with all the latest headlines by heading to our website, SIXNewsAU.com, and by following us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Lit. Just search 6 News AU to find us. Help keep us independent as well by donating just $4 a month and receive exclusive benefits, patreon.com/6NewsAU. I'm Leonardo Puglisi. Thanks for your company.